Hi, I'm Marc,
And I'm Maria,
and we'd like to introduce you to the Sign Language Dataset Compendium.
a new overview of sign language resources. Basically, all sign languages are under-resourced languages. Both corpora and lexical resources are rare and usually quite limited in size, if they exist at all. So when we started working on Project Easier, an EU project working on automatic translation between the signed and spoken languages of Europe, one of our first tasks was to compile information on what data might be available to us. What we realized was that it was quite difficult to identify many datasets and even more difficult to compile sufficient information about things like their size, participant demographic, or license conditions. A few datasets could be found in language repositories, and some were mentioned in old literature surveys. But mostly, we had to rely on web searches and our own literature review of over 300 papers. From this, we created a 100-page report providing a structured outline of European Sign Language data. The responses to this report were so enthusiastic that we decided that we wanted to extend our work even further and make it a global overview of datasets for all sign languages. This meant not only adding more information, but also rethinking how we make this information available. The result is the Sign Language Dataset Compendium, a new website that already lists over 100 different resources, with more to come. Let's have a look at the compendium. The website has 4 main entry types: corpora, lexical resources, such as dictionaries and vocabulary indices, data collection tasks, and languages. Let's start by looking at one of the 41 corpora that we have so far. Each entry has a table of structured information and a free-form text section to introduce the dataset and include any information that may not have fit in the table. The standardized table makes it easy to compare different resources, as the structure is the same for all corpora listed in the compendium. It covers factors like its size, languages, and participant demographic, but also information like file formats, usage license, and where to find both data and relevant literature. The table structure for lexical resources is similar, although some of the table rows are different, of course. Further below, you can find another section that comes in handy when you're looking for comparable data. Here, we list all the data collection tasks of the corpus, which have also been used in other corpora. These tasks can range from retellings of specific materials, like the frog story, to general prompts like asking participants to relate their deaf life experiences. You will find information on which task is used by the corpus, which language it was performed in, how many recordings you can find in the open or restricted access parts of the corpus, and also where you can find those specific recordings. To get more information on the task itself, you can click on the name of the task. This will lead you directly to the task entry in the compendium. As you can see, entries for data collection tasks follow a very similar structure, giving a general description of the task, followed by a table providing information like a general classification of the stimulus type and where the stimulus materials may be found. Again, this is followed by a section linking tasks and corpora, except this time it identifies all the corpora that include this task. Another way to look for relevant resources is to start by looking up the language you are interested in. The language index lists them by their most common English name and acronym, but you can also look them up using other names via the search filter. Apart from linking to all the corpora and lexical resources that cover the language, every entry also lists the ISO and glottolog codes of the language, as well as the established names and acronyms that we could determine. Now that we had a glance at the compendium, we would like to explain what criteria we use to curate our selection of resources. First of all, every dataset has to fulfill some qualitative conditions, such as representing natural language use by L1 signers rather than interpreted spoken language content or language learner recordings. On the quantitative side, each resource must meet certain size requirements, although those requirements have changed from those of the original report. As mentioned before, we started the compendium as an overview of European Sign Language resources, with a focus on finding datasets that would be useful to machine learning. This made us disregard smaller resources in favor of larger ones that provide significant amounts of annotations. It became apparent that even within Europe, there were large differences in how much the creation of sign language resources was supported in different countries. This imbalance became even more pressing when we expanded our goals to a global search. Sticking with our original criteria would mean not covering many languages at all. At the same time, simply lowering our requirements would mean that those languages with comparatively strong support and funding structures might dominate the compendium through the inclusion of many of their smaller datasets. So we decided to work with two sets of curation criteria: strict criteria and minimal criteria. All datasets have to meet the minimum criteria, but if some datasets of a given language also met the strict criteria, we would prioritize those and then move on to other languages first. We may, of course, come back to the smaller resources in future once we have covered all languages and have developed some filter functions to avoid mini dataset overload.
As you have seen, we try to make the entries of the compendium comparable by structuring and standardizing the information we provide. At the same time, we had to be realistic and see what information would actually be available for enough resources. We also wanted to stay flexible enough to include resources with varying kinds and granularities of information. So we defined a general structure, but allowed the individual sections to mostly be free-form text. Internally, this free-form text is enhanced with XML markup to allow us to interconnect entries, include citations, or format them otherwise. We are currently working on extending this markup to help us with extracting machine-readable metadata from our descriptions. Such metadata will, on the one hand, help us in introducing new features like search filters and sorting functions, but it also makes us more compatible with other services. As one example, we are currently working on being registered as a data provider for the Open Language Archives community, OLAC for short. This helps both our visibility as well as the visibility of the resources we describe. During our search for datasets, we did also come across a small number of other resource overviews. These were usually one-off reports that had by now become somewhat outdated. Our goal is to treat the compendium as a growing resource that will be extended and revised over time. We plan to maintain this effort for at least the next 5 years. In that time, we also hope to develop a sustainable long-term strategy. To make the compendium more independent from factors like web hosting, we plan to also generate a PDF version of its contents, which will be easier to archive and distribute independently. With the Sign Language Dataset Compendium, we present a resource that we hope will help researchers and other interested parties in finding suitable sign language resources. We also hope that our efforts in structuring information about sign language datasets will lead to realistic standards that creators will find both usable and worth adapting. As the compendium is growing over time, we will not only add more resources, but also revise our website features and curation criteria. If you have any suggestions for how we can make the compendium even better, we would be more than happy to discuss them. Thank you.